Hi everybody, this is Silver Spook, and this is gonna be the first Silver Spook podcast. So I'm Silver Spook slash Christian Miller, creator and founder of Silver Spook Games, and I've been game developing I've been working on games for like about 20 years or so. I mean, I don't know, since like high school. And I'm into the latest games are Neo-Feud. Well, it's out already on itch.io, and it's going to be coming out on Steam. I cannot give you a release date yet because I'm preparing the store, but it's going to be coming to Steam soon. So Neo-Feud, I'm currently working on a game called Dismaton. Both of them are science fiction slash cyberpunk adventure games using the Adventure Game Studio engine. That's basically me. So Fitz, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Okay. Hi, I'm Maciek, also known as Fitz, and I'm also a game developer, and I made 3 games also in Adventure Game Studio, my most recent one being the Unprintable Magenta. And I also do comics, I occasionally write, and my most recent endeavor is making music videos, also using Adventure Game Studio, quite oddly.
Right. Yeah. So I guess I'll throw the question to you. What do you predict the world will be like in, let's say, 5 to 10 years?
I do have hope for flying cars. I seriously would love to see that in my lifetime, but I hope it does not go terribly wrong. Kind of like plane crashes, or instead of plane crashes, car crashes all the time. Cars crashing from the sky. That would be terrible. But it's been my dream to have flying cars and jetpacks ever since I was a kid. Yeah, because here at former Eastern Bloc, we actually were big on sci-fi. We had Stanisław Lem and other Russian writers, and we were disconnected from the American culture, but we have our own sci-fi, and it was a big topic. And there was the whole space race between Russia and the U.S. So it was a big topic. So as a result, we were into sci-fi, and I was into sci-fi. I think the most influential thing for me was the Terminator movies, especially the second Terminator movie and the whole Skynet thing, because AI is this mind-blowing concept that I have so many ideas for, and I wish I had the kind of time and the kind of mental capacity to write something interesting about it. And my idea is that it's not going to be Skynet's not going to be this thing that openly goes to war with humans, but something that's working underground, and it's going to destroy humanity by humans' hands. I think a lot of technology addicts humans, like for example the cell phones. I think I'm getting a little preachy here, but it's talked about all over that people are just staring into their cell phones and texting while driving and texting while walking, getting killed, killing people. And I think that would be the perfect tool to let humanity erase itself. And
Right.
and also I think greedy CEOs of tech companies could be the easiest tools to propagate new technologies to addict people. Because they'll do everything for the buck. And yes, so I think humanity will wipe itself out, and the super AI will just stand by watching and then take over peacefully without any effort.
That sounds like a fun sci-fi, at least some kind of story, possibly novel. We'll see.
Yeah, and getting back to Terminator 2, I think I've read somewhere that it was inspired by Harlan Ellison's "I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream." And there was this robot who viciously hated humans, and it enslaved, I think, 5 people and tortured them in some sort of virtual reality, I think.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Yeah.
As I understand it, it's been a while, but the plot is it's the machine, kind of like a Skynet scenario, but this is long before Terminator was written, or produced.
Yeah, it was 60s or 70s.
Yeah, and so the machine took what's similar is the military created an advanced in computer intelligence which took over, destroyed humanity, basically went mad, and everyone on the planet, all humans are dead. It saved 5 of the humans in order to get. I think it's basically mad, but it wants to hurt these people as badly as possible. So it puts them through these horrible scenarios, like the worst possible realities that they could ever individually experience. It takes like their worst fears and generates virtual
I read
scenarios.
The story, a long time ago. I don't know, maybe 10 years. So I don't remember in details, but yeah, it was pretty gruesome. And then there was the game in the late 90s, and I think it diverged from it quite a bit, because I don't remember there being a Nimdok in the story. And that was, I think, the darkest part in the game, because Nimdok was this Dr. Mengelay's apprentice in the Auschwitz, or in some other Nazi concentration camp. And I've only played that part in the game, and it was gruesome in every way.
Yeah, I remember it being pretty gruesome for sure.
Yeah. So also, yeah, another thing that may come in the near future is the bodily augmentation, like implants, cybernetic implants, or prosthetics. And I think it has the capacity of going wrong in all possible ways, like in Deus Ex.
Oh, right.
Like where it's just one of these things that have planned obsolescence, and like 2 years, and before you even managed to pay all the rates, it's basically unusable, and you have to get a new one.
Yeah, right. Except if it's in your body, then it's a lot harder than if you just have a car that doesn't work anymore. If your body stops functioning, it threatens your life and your well-being.
Yeah, because like modern smartphones have a predicted lifespan of like 2 years. What is that? I have this very old Nokia phone. Like, Nokia doesn't even exist anymore, and I bought this really cheap, basic Nokia just for calling people and texting. and it's 8 or 9 years old, and it's still working perfectly. And I only need to charge it like every 10 days.
Yeah, I love those phones. I had one, but I eventually it broke. I think I might have dropped it out of a car or something. But it was really hard to break those phones. They're so sturdy. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I dropped this one quite a lot too, and I'm gonna be devastated if it eventually breaks. But yeah, that's me. I'm like full retro in a lot of ways. I'm not looking forward to the future because humanity is trying to make it as miserable as it can, just for the money.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah. Well, I know you mentioned that you hadn't read a lot of the cyberpunk, but I mean, like, in terms of the topics you just discussed, Ivory Tower, what is called sometimes referred to as ray gun gothic or hopeful, extremely positive utopian science fiction. This cyberpunk is basically the opposite of that. And I remember one of the first books by one of the first stories by William Gibson was called The Gernsback Continuum, which was in the Burning Chrome short story collection, late 70s. I think it was late 79, something like that. The story itself, which is almost like his first story in the Burning Chrome, he was rejected because he was asked to do writing, writing for a magazine on futuristic architecture in America, like the big blimps and Art Deco, and that very positive, highfalutin, look at the great astounding world of the future kind of architecture. And he wrote an article for this magazine, and they rejected him, and he got so mad, and he was unhappy with the way science fiction was going at the time. Yeah, and he basically said, you know what? Well, I'm going to give them a piece of my mind, and I'm going to write a story about why the future is absolutely not going to be like any of what these, capital F, astounding world of the future, World's Fair, rocket ships and happiness and Star Trek, and everybody is, very, basically, people are not going to be happy. And so he wrote the Gernsback Continuum, which is basically making fun of these tropes of, 16-lane highways, and everybody is blonde-haired, blue-eyed. The men are all tall, strong-jawed white guys, and have women clinging to them. And they have, it's fabulous, and everybody's happy. Nobody works. Everybody just flies around and saves other people.
Kind of like the Jetsons, except the Jetsons weren't all that optimistic. Like the George was had this boss who was real nasty, and then he was so sick of his job, which was all about pressing just this one button. But he was still exhausted from it. Like his finger hurt. So that says a lot about a human condition, like getting so soft that he's worn out by such a simple, trivial task.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, and so that's the attitude. That's where the cyberpunk was about. It was about, the punk was about, anti-authoritarian. And I don't know how it was. I mean, this is interesting because I'm from Hawaii, which is basically a colony of America. We were colonized. We still kind of. A lot of people say that we still are. And that, but I grew up in America. I basically were raised as, basically American. We speak English. We watch all the same American TV. McDonald's is everywhere. And we had, and so in America, and from this perspective, the punk was a rebellion against the Reagan era, right? In America, we had Ronald Reagan, right, who. We were going in the direction of, let's be more progressive and liberal, and let's try not to use too many fossil fuels. Let's not just all be about money all the time, and greed is good. Let's try to let's have electric cars. There was going to be an electric car in the late 70s, and then it went very hard right, and it was kind of like Trump. He kind of came in and he was like, now we're going, making money is good. We're going to outsource everybody. Everybody's going to lose their job so that the rich executive can have more money. and it's gonna be great because all this wealth will trickle down to you people. And so it's going to be great for America if we just give rich people more money. It'll be great for everybody. And that was, the punk was a reaction in a certain sense because all these people in the city, all these kids or young people were like, I don't have a future. There's nothing. I don't have a job. It's horrible. And New York is full of crime. That's where Gibson spent his formative years for a little bit. And, the sprawl is kind of based on that. And so Blade Runner itself, right, it's this dark, future was kind of because America was going down into the tubes. Like crime was everywhere, joblessness was everywhere, and that was the punk. And so cyberpunk was the technological edge of the science fictional edge of the punk revolution in a certain sense, right? But that was America. We had a certain lens into that, which was it was about, so a lot of it was anti-authoritarian, it was anti-capitalist, it was anti rich greediness, and it was technology was not going to save us all. Technology means that in Neuromancer, for example, William Gibson's biggest the biggest cyberpunk novel basically in existence. It's there is no middle class. There's nobody with a house. There's no families. Everybody is criminals. The young people are criminals, and they're working for super rich criminals. Basically you're on the street. You're walking around with your the main character is on drugs. He wants to kill himself, and he's addicted to his technology. There's a metaphor of drugs, and he claws in the night for his cyberspace, but he can't get to it because his bosses burned his talent out of his mind. Now he can't jack into cyberspace, so now he's trying to kill himself. He's pushing drugs. His girlfriend is like a woman who was human trafficked into. She was in human trafficking. She was a sex worker and killed her bosses, and then now she's she's basically she souped up her arms to be like Wolverine, and now she's a kick-ass chick who like beats up people for rich people. He works, so basically the entire world is criminals, rich criminals and poor criminals. It looks a lot like America today, where we have a rich criminal in the top, and underneath we have a bunch of people who have to deal drugs because we don't have any jobs for them. Anyway, I'm getting preachy now, so I'm going to stop with that. But you get the point. So I don't know. One interesting thing would be, what do you guys? I mean, I don't know what Eastern Europe. I've talked to a couple people. I work with one person from Estonia, but you guys must have had a totally different lens into the 80s and 90s and the 2000s.
Yeah, it was so different. Like I read how the gaming industry looked in the 90s. In the 80s, and it was so different from what we had here. I live in Poland, so it's like we think of ourselves as Europe. The Western Europe does not think about us as Europe. We're just the former Eastern Bloc. And I think a lot of people think we were actually USSR, which we weren't. And we were basically right next to the USSR, and I think the biggest difference between the Western world and us, we were cut off, and there was a lot of censorship. Have you ever read 1984?
Yeah, 1984. I definitely know that one. Yeah.
Yeah. So there was a lot of internal control. Everybody was spying on everybody. Like you can never be sure if your neighbor isn't collaborating with the authorities. Even, for example, if you were suspected. Underground activist, your spouse could be a spy for the government and working with the government to get some material to get you arrested. I hear I think in Russia it was way worse, but yeah, there was. a lot of control and a lot of paranoia. Nobody trusting nobody. Phones being tapped, openly tapped. Like you pick up the phone and there was this voice saying, "This conversation is being monitored."
Wow.
Uh, and also the kind of poverty. I think it wasn't that bad when at the time when I was born because it was 80s. We had a problem with inflation and even my family fell prey to it because my dad was running started his own company, which was also frowned upon by the authorities. Most businesses were run by the state, but they slowly allowed people to have their own businesses. Uh, and I remember when I was 8, we went to West Germany, which was also very limited, and the authorities closely monitored and the flow of people. Uh, and it was 88, so it was basically almost the end of communism, but it was still kind of heavy. And I remember the shock of seeing these stores full of toys that was and teddy bears of all colors. All I knew was teddy bears were kind of brownish beige, and there was like Kermit the Frog. It was green, like green plush. What is it? What's going on? And that's where I got my first Commodore 64.
Oh,
And that was also mind blowing. And there was also we also got a VCR there.
what year was that?
88.
Oh, 88. Oh, wow.
Yeah, I don't even know where when the VCR technology started in the US.
Oh, much longer, much before that. Commodore, like I had Nintendo by 88, I already had Nintendos. So that was way, you were 5 or 7 years behind. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, about Nintendo. That's another interesting story because we actually never officially got NES, but we have had our own NES knockoff.
Oh,
Because when the 90s started, it was this boom of private entrepreneurship, and a lot of it was not about people starting just genuine businesses. It was a lot of it was kind of shady because copyright was basically not existent at the time. So these guys went to Taiwan and got uh, s- some technology from the Taiwanese who also did a knockoff of NES and brought it to Poland, kind of neatly redesigned the whole plastic casing. Uh, and sold this as their own console called Pegasus.
oh,
Yeah, and it was basically ran every NES game normally because it had all the internal parts of an NES or just manufactured knockoffs of an NES. But it ran just fine, and then they also imported a lot of games for the knockoff NES. Even before that, we had a lot of pirated games for the Commodore 64, like we had tapes filled with like collections of 20 Commodore 64 games, and we had and I was surprised later on when I read about how this looked in Western Europe. You had legitimate normal business when where the cassettes were one game on a single cassette, and we had tons of games. Half of them maybe didn't even run properly, but yeah, these collections were how we got to know these games, and I played a lot of uh, those Commodore 64 classics and those NES games, and none of it was legal copies.
Yeah, we definitely didn't have that here. Not much. Well, there was, but not much where I was. Yeah.
Yeah, so my first original games were the PC games, Little Big Adventure and the All New World of Lemmings.
Oh, Lemmings. Yeah, yeah, love that one for sure.
Yeah, and even at the time, because that was the time when the copyright was already in effect. So people started companies that actually try to get contracts from the actual companies to import legal copies, and they didn't want to have much to do with us knowing how bad the piracy was in the during the late 80s, early 90s. And there was also the financial gap because our earnings are like one-fourth of what an average Western European earns. So they had to negotiate lower prices uh, to basically be able to sell anything here. And looking back, it was still the prices were kind of steep, and uh, 20 something years later, I can buy new games at a price that's not much higher than it was those 20 years ago.
Oh, well, that's a good deal then. Maybe I fly it to Poland then. I don't know if the exchange rate is good, but
No, I mean, now the prices are more like the European ones, but uh, at the time it was kind of exorbitant for us.
oh, okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, well, that's interesting. I grew up with NES. My NES was my first, and I was 4 or 5 when I got it. That was like my first birthday present, and I had I think Mario. Like I stayed up like for 12 hours, and I beat Mario like at like 2
I
a.m.
never beat Mario.
You never beat it. Oh well, yeah, I know
Yeah,
you mentioned that's why you like point and click, right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Uh,
Mario. Yeah, go ahead.
no, no, I was just making noise. Go on.
Yeah, so I had NES. I had like Mario, Mega Man. I played a lot of like those. I don't know. It's probably, I just back in those days when you're shopping for games. This is one difference nowadays, right? Is you just walking through the game store like we had I don't know, KB Toys. You probably don't know any of these stores, but we just had like the mall store. You have the game store. You walk inside. You look on the shelf. Oh, that cover looks good. Like, oh, what's it, Mega Man? Okay, I'll buy it. And then you just you say,
Yeah,
"Mommy, I want."
I know that we did started having stores like that in the mid 90s, I think. So yeah, exactly. It was that, and exactly as you say, the cover looked cool, and we also started having game magazines. And there's a documentary about the early 90s game press in Poland. And it was just fascinating for me because I read a lot of these magazines, and most of them, no, I mean, maybe one of the early magazines is still released, and all the rest are gone, including my favorites.
Oh, yeah. I think we had some magazines. I used to just go into the supermarket, and while I was waiting for my parents to shop, I would just read through them on the shelf. Yeah. And then I remember, yeah, you'd have to get the magazine. Well, one thing that's different for sure is if you wanted to beat a game and you didn't know how, you had to. I would look through the magazine to find the solution or the cheat code or the Konami code or whatever you needed to get through. And you definitely could not look up things on the internet. So that's one big difference with game design now is people expect the answer to be within a click, away. Whereas before, you could. I think that it was a little different. The challenge of games, I feel, is the expectation of the challenges were a lot higher back in the day, and nowadays it's much. Well, with a lot of audiences, lower.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think the problem is if you get annoyed at this game, there's just a million games out there that you can switch to. And back in the day, it was just this one game, and you just focused all your, I don't know, skills and brain power on that one game.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and for example, back in the knockoff NES era, we the cartridge that came with the console was 169 games. So that was a lot to choose from. So I wasn't particularly concerned about not being able to finish Mario because there was just such a plenty of games. And then when the PC came and became more prominent, uh, the wasn't able to afford like more than I don't know one game or two games at a time over a large span of time. So I had a lot of time to focus on that one game, and sometimes we didn't even have walkthroughs for the particular game. So it was just me and the game, and I had to beat it myself. And I think it was a lot like the early text games in the 70s, where the internet wasn't even a thing at the time, and gamers just worked in a I don't know a circle of friends in a college where there was this computer and you played the game on the campus, and they try to work it out within a group, and they had these theories. Maybe we could solve it this way or this way, and it was a group effort. And I've only read about it in this new retro magazine called Pixel that was kickstarted a few years back in Poland. It had a lot of stories about how the Western gaming looked, and it was just mind blowing to me from my perspective as a kid from a former Eastern Bloc.
Yeah, yeah. It's I never had 169 games on one cartridge. That's for sure. That never happened.
Yeah, because we started off with Gibson, and I could compare this to Philip K. Dick and his writing, and his books were it's classic sci-fi, and actually, when you read them, you think of the movie Blade Runner as this classic cyberpunk, and the character uh, is sort of cyberpunkish, like you talked about how the society is kind of dissolved, and the my image of the cinematic version of Decker was that this guy who just roams the streets almost as if he has no home, and no family. And in the novel, he actually had a wife, and he had this steady job as a regular detective, and they had also there was also this thing about animals, because there was actually very few real animals left, so people would buy robotic animals and pretend them to be real. There was real animals were a sign of status, so sort of like a big car.
Right. Yeah.
Uh, yeah, and a lot of Dick's prose is not really does looks like a slightly distorted version of our reality today. It's not about lasers or starships. It's just uh, a weird version, uh, a weird distortion of our own reality. And that's, I think, the hallmark of great sci-fi. That it's says something about the condition of the world today in some weird, distorted mirror way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just like yeah, there's actually a lot of things I was thinking of saying, but one thing I was definitely saying is going back to Blade Runner, which is again based on "Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep" by Philip K. I'm sure anybody watching this probably knows that, but just in case you don't, yeah. So Blade Runner was Ridley Scott's movie, and when you said cyberpunk is Blade Runner, basically I remember. I mean, this is another weird thing that's particular to me because William Gibson is basically thought of as the father of cyberpunk. Definitely the most well-known reader. He won the three biggest science fiction prizes in 1 year with Neuromancer. But my particular, I met my wife actually through the William Gibson discussion board forums on the internet, and we actually met. I met in person with him. I met my wife at the same time I met William Gibson, and the joke is William Gibson was already married, so I just took my wife instead. That was the joke. So yeah, it's really interesting. He's a really nice guy. He lives in Vancouver, Canada, and but anyway, so the point, I guess my point is that it's I know a lot about him because I've spent some time with him, and we have friends who know him. In when we visit, we try to meet up with him in his hometown of Vancouver. I have one friend who's definitely very close with him. He has lunch. He has Thai food with him all the time. And anyway, so the point is, I guess like that he said personally that that Blade Runner, he felt a little bit like, oh no, like Blade Runner got the jump on his science fiction because as I recall, Blade Runner came out before Neuromancer, and he said Gibson himself said, wow, that's basically what I envisioned in Neuromancer, and a lot of it was because there was a lot of things that were happening simultaneously. It wasn't like one of them copied the other one at the time. It was just that there's a lot of things going on in the culture. Like we mentioned, the 80s, Reaganomics, Depression, Japan coming on the scene as the big. Everybody thought Japan was going to be taking over the planet, right? Everybody's speaking Japanese ads everywhere in Blade Runner, right? And it's like, obviously, that future is not going to happen. Japan is in a lost decade. China, if anything, is bigger than them now. But anyway, so that was where, in Neuromancer takes place in Japan for a large part of it. The Zaibatsus, basically Japanese mega corporations, are the big powers in in Neuromancer, and anyway, so the point is that Blade Runner is definitely like the visually in terms of like what people think of as cyberpunk, and this is another topic I could go far off into, but I'm not going to do that right now. Is that people think of cyberpunk visually as rainy. It's like film noir, but at night with futurism in it. Like you got some flying cars, you got some neon, you got some Tokyo looking stuff, you got rain, you got people in detectives, Vangelis music, you got girl sexy girls in polyester 80s neon clothing, and burnt out so it's very like it's basically future noir, but a lot of people just take the visual of it, and that's one complaint I have, is that some people even complain, Neofeud, my game, it's not cyberpunk because you don't have enough shiny neon, it's too dirty, and it doesn't have you don't have enough guys acting cool in bars drinking fancy liquor. And I was like, that's not what cyberpunk is about. I'm sorry, young person who doesn't I feel like a crotchety old crank like telling young people that's not what it's about. You don't know what you're talking about. But it's like that visually, yes, that's visually, Ridley Scott nailed the they say he's one of the most influential visual directors of all time, because that so many not just film, fashion, architecture, so many things borrowed from that one film, Blade Runner, so influential. And but what kids take from it now, it does seem like, and the AAA studios are jumping on it, as I think it's one of these pixel art games, which is, I liked it. Late last night is going to be made into an Xbox game, and I mean, I hope they handle it well, but I hope that they don't lose the spirit, which, like you mentioned, is the spirit of the science fiction. That the really good thing about it was not the flashy style, although it was nice. That's a cool style that you have with the trench coat. That's very nice. But what's important is that it was, talking about the society, the world, the human condition, and trying to say something, cautionary, like saying, hey, watch out, what are we doing here? Or this is what we really are doing here. And this is, it was about trying to not necessarily, it's a little preachy to say that we're trying to revolutionize the world, but trying to say something about the world which had not been said, which was more important. I mean, I think Gibson himself, he kind of abandoned cyberpunk because he felt that it was becoming too much about it was too much just a fashion accessory, and not about the literary, about the, I don't know, it sounds high, like you're so important, but he's about the artistic endeavor of writing something that was, important and relevant to the time, and I'm also cynical a little bit about the things, because I'm more of an old school. I want to, well, anyways, I can go on a long time. You should talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, we're old grumps. I'm in my late 30s, so I'm beginning to think like an old grandpa, like, oh, back in my day. So yeah, and like you said, cyberpunk is not all about neons. It's the same as sci-fi in general is not about spaceships and lasers, as I said before. And I think, kids who have not been exposed to these classics, or just experience little watered down things like through movies rather than books, will have this slightly distorted picture. And I also remember this weird exchange in reference to the neo-noir. There's this musical trend called synthwave or retro wave, and it borrows a lot of the visual aesthetics from this neo-noir, and and it's basically music that borrows from 80s electronica, like John Carpenter and Vangelis, and there's a bunch of YouTube channels devoted to promoting that music. And one of these channels often tries experimental stuff, and this one time it posted something that's more like the Cold Wave or a little like Joy Division or The Cure, and some kid, like, I don't know, might have been 15, judging by the avatar, which was his actual picture, or even younger. He said, like, this is not 80s. And I would thought to myself, as if you would know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really funny how that it works. Yeah,
Yeah,
kids they
because
think.
in the mind of this kid, only the synthwave is 80s, and I agree that it's one of the flavors of the 80s. But I remember 80s music myself, and I know what it was, and it was Cold Wave was a big thing, and I remember how it influenced the music here in Poland. Uh, I don't. Um, I don't even know when The Cure made their debut, but uh, our music here had a lot of this Joy Division vibe. Yeah, and then there was Michael Jackson, or I don't know if you remember Alan Parsons Project.
Yeah,
Uh,
vaguely, yeah.
yeah, their song called "Don't Answer Me" was for me the most memorable '80s songs I can think of, and it also had this kind of cartoonish noir video. You can look it up, and I, as a 5-year-old kid, I just adored this video, and this also ties neatly back into our conversation about neo-noir with the videos, basic noir aesthetics, but like this detective in a trench coat saving a damsel in distress from a brute.
All right, everybody. So thanks for tuning in to the Silver Spook podcast. I'm Silver Spook of Silver Spook Games / Christian Miller. You can find my stuff at what is it? Silver. Well, just Google Silver Spook. Silver Spook Games. Neofeud is the game that I have out. It's going to be coming out on Steam at some point. It's already out on itch.io. Buy it now, and you get a free Steam key when it comes out. Dysmaton is the game I'm currently working on. Dysmaton. And you can play a demo of that from also itch.io.
So I'm Fitz, and you can find my games either or through the Adventure Game Studio forums, or you can Google the one that's most Googleable, and this one's called The Unprintable Magenta. Or you can try Monty the Komodo Dragon. Or you can try my online comics, which are now defunct and have been for a long time, but they're still there. They're on the Duck webcomics, and they are called A Bit Cheesy. And then there was my other comic Chomp. And I also go as Fitz on the Duck webcomics.
Thanks everybody for listening in or possibly watching the still image for long periods of time. Yeah. So yeah. I hate doing this part because I can't think of a good way to sign off. Bye. All right. Oh, you can say goodbye. Say goodbye in Polish.
Cześć. Cześć i czołem. Siemka.